Hello everyone, I'm Surbhi Mishra and today I'm here to discuss about some new topics in business communication. So today we will be discussing about listening. What is listening? Why listening is important in business communication and what are the different types? What are the process? So we'll be discussing these topics in today's session. Let's see. Moving towards the topics which we're going to cover today, as I already mentioned, we'll be discussing the introduction to listening, the importance, what are the differences between listening and hearing, what are the different types of listening, the process of listening, what are the barriers towards listening, and how we can uh, produce an effective listening by following some factors. So let's start with the topic. So we'll be starting from the meaning of the listening, like what listening is all about. So listening is the active process of receiving, interpreting, and responding to a particular spoken words or message. So, as I am speaking something and you are listening, so it is the active process of receiving, interpreting, and responding to a spoken words. It involves more than just hearing. Why? Because hearing is something which doesn't require consciousness. But when we talk about listening, it requires understanding and processing of those information which is being communicated. So let's see, let's take an example. So here I have mentioned the example of a teacher. If a teacher explains a complex concept, suppose a mathematical formula or some mathematical numericals in a classroom, a student who listens actively will not only hear the words, but will also understand how to execute it, how to implement that formula, and will be able to understand the concept of that numerical and will able to ask some relevant questions related to that particular topic and will apply the knowledge as well. So, what does it explains that a listening requires a proper understanding and interpretation of the words. But when we talk about hearing, hearing is just hearing a particular sound. But when we talk about listening, it is more than hearing, right? So I hope the definition must be clear to the definition or meaning must be clear to you all. So I'll move towards the next slide. What is the importance of listening? Why listening is important in our lives or in an organization? So let's start with the first point. Listening is important in understanding. Why? Because it enhances understanding. How we can say that? Effective listening not only helps in comprehension of information, but also understanding it well. Why? Because if we're not able to listen it carefully, we won't be able to understand what has been told, right? Suppose if somebody wants to undergo some sort of treatment and doctor is not able to make that person understand about what process he has to follow to undergo for the successful surgery, and if a doctor is telling to a person, if a patient is not listening it properly, then he or she might not be able to get what process they have to follow. So uh, listening here is important. Why? Because it enhances our understanding. We able to understand the things in a very proper manner. So it helps in better comprehension of information. Next comes builds relationship. When we talk about listening, we say it builds relationship. Why? Because when we talk about communication, it is not always mandatory to be a good speaker. Very few times it is very important, equally important. If you are a good speaker, it's very good. But at the same time, you have to be a good listener as well. Why? Because good listening skills can strengthen up relationships by making the speaker feel valued and understood, right? Suppose if somebody is saying, suppose if we talk about the conversation between a superior and a subordinate, if your superior, your boss is saying something to you and you're not hearing it clearly, you are interrupting in between, so it might affect your relationship, and also you won't be able to understand the entire information, right? And there will be interruption. The speaker might also get distracted, and obviously the listener will, because the interruptions are coming in between. So during the conversation, when the speaker is saying something, to value him, to feel him, to make him valued and to understood his saying, we must try to hear it well, listen to it well, not hear it, listen to it very well. So good listening skills also helps in building relationships, right? Next is improves problem solving. How we can say improves problem solving? By understanding the issues and viewpoints presented, solutions can be made effectively, right? How? Because when we are listening to somebody very clearly and very, we are observing what the person is saying, we are hearing, we are listening to them very properly, then in that case, we come to understand what were the issues, as in a very different emotions with a different mindset. If you are not consciously listening to a person, then you might not get to understand what they are saying. So to understand it properly, to understand it in a manner they want it, you have to first listen to them very carefully without any disturbances, right? So by understanding it carefully, the issues and viewpoints can be presented, and therefore it may help in solving a particular problem. Next, increases productivity. In the workplace, effective listening can lead to better team collaboration and productivity. If you are getting instructions from the top level of the management, from your bosses, you must make sure that you are listening to them very consciously, by listening to each and every key point, so that you must perform those assigned tasks with very good energy and with giving good results without hampering any resources, without wasting any time. So it also increases our productivity. Next comes encourages learning. Listening always encourages learning. Why? Because learning is, we can say there is no age of learning. We learn every day, we learn something new. So learning is very important to uh, improve. So we can improve ourselves every day. Even we must follow the rule of continuous improvement, as the continuous improvement will help you towards achieving better objectives, better goals, and you might get developed, and you will also achieve better career prospects. So continuous improvement will help you in achieving all things. So here, listening, when we are listening very uh, keenly, very, we can say very properly, then we may acquire some new knowledge and new skills. And for that, we have to listen. To learn something, you have to listen it carefully, right? Now moving towards the next slide. Now we'll be talking about the process of learning. Now, what is the entire process of learning? So, as I said, to learn something, you have to listen it. So we'll here discuss about the process of listening, how a listening will help you to learn something, and how you will be listening towards a particular spoken words, towards a speech, towards a lecture, or towards anything you are listening. So the number one, the very first point is receiving, right? You have to receive some sound or some information which a speaker is saying. Then you have to understand it the way it has meant. You have to understand, you have to interpret the meaning. You will only do if you have consciously listened to that person, right? Then you have to evaluate it, what has been said, you have to analyze it, then you have to remember it, you have to retain it, memorize it, and then only you will be able to respond. Then you will be able to say something, answer something, right? So learning is a 5-step of process. It includes receiving the information, understanding that information, evaluating that information, remembering it, and then responding to the questions regarding the same information or the topic which you have been discussing. So we're going to discuss these 5 points in detail. Let's start with the first point. The first point is receiving. Receiving is the initial step in the listening process where the listener physically hears the sound. So what this stage is saying, this stage involves the auditory system, that everything is audible. We are able to listen up. We are able to pick up some sound waves and transmit them to the brain. So it is a scientific biological process where our organs are working. We are able to listen the sounds. Then our sensory organ is working. The sound waves are transmitting the signals to the brain, and it is purely a physiological process and does not require any cognitive effort, right? So it is the initial step in the process where the listener physically hears the sound. Example over here, we can say when someone talks to you, you receive the sound, you understand it, you evaluate it, and then you respond to their question. So we can say when someone tells you, your ears receive the sound waves and then transmit to your brain, that something has said to you, right? So this point I hope is clear to you all. Moving towards the second point. The second point is understanding. Now, here understanding means uh, understanding is the process of comprehending the meaning of the words and sentences heard. At this stage, the brain processes the sounds into recognizable language and interprets the words and sentences. Understanding involves decoding the message and grasping the speaker's intent. So what here means that when the message is being sent to the receiver, what receiver does? Receivers decodes the message. That person tries to understand it the way it has made. So hearing the phrase, it's raining outside, and recognize that it means water is falling from the sky, right? So what you are doing, you are decoding it. You are understanding the message. Now moving towards the third point, evaluating. Evaluating is judging the content of the message for its accuracy, validity, and relevance. What we do here, we try to evaluate the content, right? What we do here is we try to see whether the content is accurate, is valid, is correct or not. And this stage involves critical thinking process. What we do here is we analyze the particular message. Is that message credible, is having logic, and is relevant or not? And then we evaluate whether the listener decides how to respond to the message. And then we decide whether we have to respond towards it, whether we have to answer it or not, right? So listening to a news report can be an example over here. We try to hear some news and determine whether the information is trustworthy based on the source and evidence provided or not. Because many a times what happens are there are rumors. So in that case, you have to make sure that your information which is being transmitted to you, which is being given to you is right, is correct, valid or not. You must check the source and credibility of the information, right? So as to ensure that the information is trustworthy and there is no rumors into it, right? Moving towards the next slide, we'll talk about the fourth step in the process of listening, that is remembering. Now, remembering here, as the name suggests, we are memorizing it. We are storing the information, right, for future use. So, this states that retaining the useful information, retaining the information which is being heard, and allows the listener to recall the message in future, right? So, which is crucial for ongoing communication and application. So what happens over here is you have to store the information for your future use. Remembering a friend's advice can be an example over here. We are going to a good restaurant and recalling it when you decide where to eat later on. Right. So what you are doing is you are remembering that yes, this that friend has told me that this restaurant at that particular location is having a very good service. So we must go there. We must try that. So what you are doing, you are remembering it, and now you are using it and applying it, right? So this was the fourth step. Let's see the next step. The next step is responding to a particular information. So responding is something giving feedback to the speaker, which could be verbal or non-verbal, right? So this stage completes the listening process. The listener provides feedback to the sender or to the speaker, indicating that the message has been received and understood. So what this state says that the message is received by the receiver and he has decoded it and understood it in the similar format as it was made. And now responses can be verbal also and non-verbal also, like answering a question, or non-verbal like can be smiling or nodding your head, right? So these things can be the form of responses, right? Response can be for verbal, that means written, oral, or non-verbal. Like you are answering using gestures, facial expressions, anything, right? So this completes the entire process of listening. Moving towards the next slide. Now we can say, we can summarize the entire listening process in a, very simple manner. We can say receiving is the action or the act of hearing sound. It is the physical act of hearing sound. When we talk about understanding, it means the message is being comprehended and the comprehending the meaning of the heard message, we can say that we have heard the message and we have understood it also, right? Evaluating, now in the third step, what we are doing, we are assessing it. We are evaluating the validity, the credibility of the content. Then in the fourth stage, we used to store the information for our future recall or future use. In the last step, we provide the feedback to the sender or the speaker, completing the communication loop. So each step is very, very essential for effective listening. You must ensure that communication is clear, accurate, and meaningful, right? Because if the message which you are communicating with is not clear, is not accurate, then listener will get hampered and the entire process of transmitting information will be void, right? So to avoid that, make sure the information which you are going to share must contain clear, accurate, and meaningful message and content. Let's move towards the next topic. The next topic is listening versus hearing. Now here we'll be talking about the difference between listening and hearing. As we discussed in the starting of the session, that hearing is unconscious, right? We do not require very consciousness, very much effort, because it is a passive thing. So let's discuss. Hearing is a passive physiological process of perceiving sound. It does not require conscious effort. For example, hearing background noise while reading a book. So yes, you might be getting that, yes, something is happening in the background, some bell is ringing or some noise is coming, but you are not very much interested in it. You just, as it is a physiological process, there will be some sound, you will get to know your sensory organ will transmit that particular stimulation to your brain, and your brain will respond that yes, such sound occurred, right? So it is basically a passive physiological process. When we talk about here listening, it is an active and cognitive process. Why? Because we are paying attention towards it, we are interpreting it, we are responding towards it. Then in that particular case, we are totally involved. We have to make a conscious effort to understand it, right? So listening is an active and cognitive process as compared to hearing. Here we can say engaging in a conversation with a friend and responding thoughtfully. So why? If you were hearing only, then you won't be able to answer. But now you are totally engaged in a conversation with your friend or with your family. Then there you have to respond very thoughtfully, right? Let's see the differences. So as it is mentioned, listening versus hearing. Hearing is passive. Why? Because we don't need too much of effort to be put in. Listening is active. We require an effort to listen properly. Second is refers to the hearing refers to the act of perceiving a sound through ear, while listening refers to the act of making a conscious effort to perceive the sound. Now, what listening is saying, we have to make a conscious effort to understand something. We are not just hearing, we are understanding it, then we have to evaluate as well. But hearing is a act of hearing sound. Hearing does not require a conscious effort, but yes, listening do require a conscious effort. Listening is voluntary. As we are involved in some conversations, we have to be uh, participate. We have to participate as we are into a conversation, and we have to respond. So in that case, listening is voluntary. When we talk about hearing is involuntary because we don't have to participate in it. We don't have to respond into it, right? Moving towards the next slide, we will talk what are the different types of listening. Now, as what we have discussed till now, we have discussed what is listening, what are the importance of listening, what is the process of listening, and what are the difference between hearing and listening. Now, by discussing all till here, we must be like our concept must be clear about what listening is all about and what the term listening here refers to. So now coming up with this particular topic, types of listening, we will be discussing the different types. So here are basically 5 types of listening, and we will be discussing each of them in a very detailed manner. So let's start. So the 5 types of listenings are active listening, passive listening, critical listening, empathetic listening, and selective listening. So we are here, we will be talking about each of them, discussing the characteristics of each type and examples. So let's start with the very first type of listening. Number 1 is active listening. We'll be talking about what active listening is all about. Active listening, it is the process of fully concentrating on what is being said rather than just passively hearing the message of the speaker. So what here is saying that active listening is about concentrating and then listening that what is being said instead of just hearing, right? Because hearing doesn't require concentration. So it involves with all aspects, all senses, and giving full attention to the speaker. So as we discussed, active listening is cognitive. We require full concentration. what is being said, and we have to involve into it with when we are listening to it with full concentration, we have to be a volunteer into it, right? Giving attention to all the points of the speaker. So let's see what are the characteristics of this type of listening. This type of listening includes the four characteristics. Number one is concentration, understanding, remembering, and responding. Now we'll discuss one by one. Now, the concentration says we have to fully focus on the speaker, what they are saying, right? Because then only we'll be able to understand it, to remember it, and to evaluate it. Now, understanding the message means to understand, to comprehend the message, to decode the message. The way is made, it has been made, right? Now, as as the sender said, please reach to the office by 10 a.m. tomorrow. So here you have to understand that you have to reach it tomorrow by 10 in the at your workplace, right? So you have to understand the same way, right? You cannot understand it like, oh, tomorrow it will be at this time we can reach, as we usually go to the office at this particular time. So it might happen that it is just an example that you have to listen to the instructions properly, keeping into consideration the date, the venue, the time, everything, right? So you have to then retain the information. You may not forget it, right? As it is the regular practice to be punctual, be at your workplace on time. So due to some other things, you may not get confused, or you may not forget the mandatory part of the information. So retaining the information for future use. The next comes is responding. Now, what will you do? You will provide the feedback that yes, I'll be available on the mentioned date, time, and venue. So you have to provide feedback either from your gestures, your facial expressions, or from your spoken words. For example, during a meeting, an employee actively listens to their manager's instructions, takes notes, and asks clarify questions to ensure that they understand the task at hand. So what here is, this example is stating that we have to understand the manager's instructions so as we can understand how the task has to be performed. Everything should have clarity then and there only. Instead of stretching it for too long, we must focus on to clear the things then and there only, right? Let's move to the next category of listening is passive listening. Now, as we have understood the active listening, now we'll uh, discuss the opposite of it, that is passive listening. Passive listening occurs when a person hears something without giving concentration or without attention and interacting with the speaker. So what is mentioned over here is passive listening occurs when a person hears something without giving it full attention or interacting with the speaker. He or she neither interacts with the speaker nor listens to them very carefully, right? So let's see the characteristics over here. Minimum engagement. As you are not listening to the speaker carefully, you are not engaged with that particular speech, you are not interacting with the speaker, so you will be least bothered, you will be least engaged. So not fully engaged with the speaker. Number two is lack of feedback, as you were not able to participate in the interaction, you were not listening to the speaker attentively. So obviously you have no response or a very limited response. Next is superficial understanding. You miss the basic understanding without deeper processing, right? So as you were not attentive in the entire process, you were not able to get the particular understanding. So the example can be listening to background music while doing other tasks without paying attention to the lyrics or melodies, right? So what you are doing is you are listening to a music and you are also studying. So nothing will retain in your mind, as your mind is diverted in two things, right? You are listening also, you are studying also. So this will not result into a very good thing. So this explains the passive listening. Now we'll be discussing the next category of listening.